So welcome to part 2 of my test of using things 3. So I just wanted to mention some things that I forgot to mention in my part 1 video about the Things 3 app. So let's just get through this list real quick. You can convert tasks into projects. It's nice, it's always nice to have that. You can create separate app windows. It's really only useful for certain use cases and power users. You can send or forward emails into things. Personally, I would just recommend pasting like a Gmail link inside the task note field instead. There's quick entry, which is great for power users or anyone who wants to work in other app windows and wants to reduce friction. You can auto import Apple reminders, but keep in mind that attachments, subtasks, and location-based reminders can't be imported because they're just not supported by Things 3 in general. You can't add favorites or pin items to the sidebar. You can manually sort projects on the sidebar, order them however you want. But if you want to keep a project at the top, you just have to have it at the very top above areas, which means that you have to make a decision between keeping it inside of an area or outside of an area at the very top. There's like a special secret section called This Evening, which is part of the Today stage. It basically just adds a section header at the bottom of the Today view, but in order to move a task into this section, you have to use the schedule pop-up. However, the This Evening stage will not appear in the sidebar. And probably the biggest thing that I forgot to mention in my part 1 video is Things URLs. With these special URLs, you can create casual links to open specific views. You basically just paste these links in other apps, and you can use them to quickly jump back into the Things app. It's useful if you prefer to use separate apps, like for notes, planner, calendar, etc. Not really useful for general app switching, since you can just use the default macOS app switching key command. So overall, it is convenient, but in my opinion, it's sort of like an excuse for the developers not to add more features to the app. Another great thing about Things URLs is the ability to hand over from other apps. Essentially, you can import your data from other apps like MyNode or Drafts into Things. It's a pretty solid time saver when it's possible, but keep in mind that not every Mac app will support this. Once again, overall convenient, but might be an excuse for developers not to add more features. And finally, the most powerful way you can use Things URLs is automation, which allows you to do things like create tasks, show tag filters, perform searches, and more. It's a really powerful way to create shortcuts and workflow chains on iOS using third-party apps like Launch Center Pro, Launcher, or Workflow. And yeah, I would definitely recommend this for power users. So next I want to talk about how Getting Things Done, also known as GTD, is implemented inside of the Things 3 app. I did mention in my part 1 video that this was probably one of my biggest complaints with using Things 3. So when it comes to GTD inside of any task manager, you're really focusing mainly on the sidebar. Now before I dive into the sidebar, I do want to talk about how deadlines work inside of Things. Like with other GTD apps, inside of Things, due dates are called deadlines, and they are separate from scheduled dates. Essentially, scheduled dates are when you want the task to show up in your Today view, and deadlines are just when you need to get the task done at the absolute latest. So the deadline convention inside of Things 3 is really simple. When a deadline date reaches today's date, that task will be seen in the Today stage, regardless of where the task is located, except if the task is located in the trash. So now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the first stage in the sidebar, which is the inbox. And for each one of these stages, I'm just going to go through a little checklist followed by some notes. Do tasks in the inbox maintain an associated project? No, they don't, but it makes logical sense because the reason why a task is in the inbox in the first place is because you haven't sorted the task and you haven't decided where it's going to go just yet. However, tasks in the inbox can have tags, which is useful for filtering inside of the inbox. The inbox does work like a proper GTD stage, and it does follow the deadline convention. Once a deadline meets today's date, that task will also be seen in the anytime stage. Just keep in mind that the inbox is not treated equal to a project like you might see in other apps. It's just a stage that sort of acts like a project, since tasks inside of it can't be associated with projects. So overall, I rate the inbox as good. Next, let's move on to the Today stage. It does maintain associated project, however, it does not work like a GTD stage, as any task in the Today view will also be seen in the Anytime stage. Following the convention of deadlines is not applicable simply because tasks with a deadline of today's date automatically appear in the Today stage. You can manually drag or assign a task to appear here, and deadline and schedule dates of today's date will also make a task appear here. So with all that being said, the Today stage is not so great. Moving on to the upcoming stage, It does maintain an associated project. It does work like a proper GTD stage. However, it does not follow the deadline convention. Tasks will still only be seen in this stage as a scheduled date will override a deadline. And as a little side note, I would also like to see deadline tasks in here, either as a separate section or blended together with the schedule tasks. Ideally, you'd be able to toggle which one you prefer. So with all that being said, I rate the upcoming stage as meh. Next, let's move on to the anytime stage. It does maintain an associated project. It does not work like a proper GTD stage, as tasks can be seen in the today stage simultaneously, and it does not follow deadline conventions. So this stage is weird. It doesn't follow stage rules. It's like a weird middle ground. If we're following the rules of the other stages on the sidebar, today tasks should not be seen here. It really doesn't make any sense. Like, why wouldn't schedule tasks also be here if today tasks are here? The app separates schedule dates from deadlines, and technically the upcoming, or as I would like to call the scheduled stage, it's like a loose form of dates, like the today view. You're not necessarily like going to get the task done today, and if you have any tasks in the upcoming view, for certain days of the week, this week, next week, whatever, you're also not necessarily going to complete those tasks on those specific days either. So there's just no consistency there. So yeah, I rate the anytime stage as bad. Next we have is someday. Tasks in here do maintain associated project. This does work like a proper GTD stage. And yes, it does follow the deadline convention. So this makes sense. You have tasks that you plan to do in the future, but you just don't want to forget about them when the time comes. And of course, when the deadline date reaches today, that task will move into the anytime stage. But yeah, it's similar to the inbox, but tasks in here can have associated projects, which makes sense since this stage is essentially a level below the anytime stage. So yeah, I rate the someday stage as good. Next we have is the logbook, which is where all your completed tasks go. It does maintain a project association for task. It does work like a proper GTD stage. Just keep in mind that this is a stage for completed tasks and projects. You must check that tick box for the task. You can't drag anything into this view. And if you uncheck or uncomplete a task, the task goes back to the previous stage where it last was. So yeah, I rate the logbook as good because it's just a completed task stage. I would prefer they named it something else like completed or done. But yeah, solid, makes sense. Nothing crazy here. And lastly, we have the trash. Tasks in here do maintain an associated project. It does work like a proper GTD stage. There's no deadline convention, but that makes sense because you really don't want tasks that you're deleting to like randomly undelete themselves. Keep in mind if you drag any tasks in here to anywhere in the sidebar, it will leave the trash. So overall, I rate trash as good. It's pretty straightforward stuff. So with all that being said, I just have some additional thoughts. As far as good stuff goes, deadline dates do stick to tasks independent of stages, including the inbox and the trash. As for the bad stuff, the upcoming stage should be called scheduled since deadlines don't make tasks appear here. And the anytime stage should be called next. And there should be a stage called later underneath it between this stage and the someday stage. So when it comes to these stages, there is one major issue, and that is losing track of a task. And so the one thing you got to keep in mind is if a task does not have an associated area or project, you can find it in at least one of the stages in the sidebar. However, there is one caveat. As I mentioned earlier, stage conventions are confusing, as inbox, upcoming, and someday tasks will not be seen in the anytime stage. So yeah, now that we got all that stuff out of the way, full disclosure, I no longer use Things 3. However, I do recommend it for certain people. So this app is for casual users who prefer task managers with minimalistic design and limited feature sets, intermediate users who enjoy GTD but don't want to be overwhelmed by it, power users who use multiple apps together but who also prefer simpler interfaces, and mobile-only users, people who just need something solid on iOS and don't care about the desktop app. But if you don't fall into that camp, you should avoid this app for the following reasons. If you don't use macOS or iOS, if you want the most feature-packed GTD experience, for that I recommend an app called Nirvana. Or if you use any of the things that Things 3 doesn't support, like the things that I mentioned in my Part 1 video, things like attachments, priorities, activity log, filters, times, separate comments, stats, or the ability to edit completion dates. This app is not for you if you need to collaborate with other people. And of course, if you just don't want to spend any money. So yeah, after looking back at my Part 1 video, I said quite a lot of negative things about the app. And I just want to point out that even though I said all those negative things, and even though I don't use Things 3 anymore, I do consider it one of the top tier task managers out there for sure. You know, it has a pretty nice design, it's very intuitive, except for a couple of the stage issues. So yeah, it's just not one of those apps that's out there for me, especially when it comes to GTD. I'd much rather use an app like Nirvana, which I have used in the past, and I plan to cover that in a future video. But yeah, overall, it is a solid app in certain ways, and when it comes to certain features, like those URLs, for example, can be very powerful for power users out there. So yeah, I don't hate the Things 3 app. I just personally prefer to use something else. So yeah, do you use the Things 3 app? Did you switch? Let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know if you'd like for me to do a proper review with scoring or a full in-depth tutorial. As always, you can find me on Twitter or Instagram. Don't forget to sign up for my email list below to get secret updates, and I'll catch you later.